So Chicago elected a far-left progressive, Brandon Johnson, as the new mayor. And I called it. I said I believed this would be the likely outcome. I had people telling me that I was wrong. And the reason why I believed this would be the likely outcome is that I noticed something. When you took a look at the mayoral election, it went to a runoff between these two candidates. You could see that there was a direct correlation, not necessarily causation, but a correlation between the racial demographic of a neighborhood and who they voted for. White neighborhoods tended to vote for the tough on crime white man. Black neighborhoods tended to vote for Lori Lightfoot. She lost, but the votes in these districts, or I should say these wards, what they're called in Chicago, were in the black neighborhood. The top three candidates to win votes were all black. So it was Lori Lightfoot, and then this is Brandon Johnson. Now, however, there is one caveat. In the progressive college area of the city, which is still mostly white, they also voted for the black candidate. I think this has to do with politics, for the most part, in the college areas, but also race to a certain degree, because critical race ideology is a large component. But I think for the most part, what you get is a far left black candidate seems to be the most likely, because college students have liberals tend to have an out-group preference based on race, and every other neighborhood seemed to have a racial in-group preference. I'm not saying that every single person voted because of the race of the individual. I'm saying there was a tendency which was pronounced in the maps. And I have the latest map to show you basically the same thing. It also appears that Hispanic neighborhoods voted, I believe for the most part, for Paul Vallis. You can see here where I'm highlighting the mouse. This is where I grew up in Chicago's southwestern portion of the city, not the overt south side, but, down here in this area. And it's mostly in this area, maybe white. And actually, I'll just show you. So here's the map of race and ethnicity by neighborhood, and we will do white. You can see here, Chicago Ridge in this area, in Chicago Midway Airport, it's about 55. I grew up in Midway, so it's 35% white. And then you have, we'll go Hispanic. You can see the Midway area, 58% Hispanic. So I'm in an area where Garfield Ridge, Clearing, etc., is 55% white to 35, and then mostly Hispanic. This area voted for Paul Vallis. Vallis is the white, tough on crime candidate. Now you can see here in this portion of the South Side, these areas all voted for Brandon Johnson. I believe many of these people favored him simply because he was black. When you look at the top of this portion here, where the colleges, I believe like Loyola and Northwestern, this voted for Johnson as well, likely because he is far left. When you look at the racial breakdown of the map, you can see the areas where Johnson won right here in the northwestern portion, not totally northern, but in a slightly more northwestern portion of the city, Ward and Precinct 29024, they vote for Johnson. You look down here in the south side, they vote for Johnson. What do we see? These areas have higher percentage of black population. Up here in the northern part where the colleges are, we can see that it is more densely white. So that's basically what I predicted. When I saw that data, and a lot of people were like, no, I'm like, look, man, I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm simply pointing out when you look at these maps and lay them over each other, that's what you get. So if you would be at all surprised by these outcomes, you weren't paying attention. Because my response was, if all of the black neighborhoods are voting predominantly for black candidates, and if the white college area is voting for the black candidate, they were voting for Brandon Johnson. This seems to be more based on ideology, mind you. The end result will be clear. The white neighborhoods will vote for Vallis. The black neighborhoods and the college area will vote for the black candidate and far left candidate, and he will likely be your winner. And there you go. That's what I thought was going to happen. The Post Millennial says, Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson defeated former Chicago Public Schools CEO Paul Vallis to replace Lori Lightfoot, who came in third. Johnson is a progressive Bernie Sanders endorsed Democrat, while Vallis was a more moderate opponent. I grew up in Chicago. It has been increasingly under far left rule forever, and it sucks. The city sucks. Sorry. Look, there's a lot of things about Chicago that are good. The problem is crime has been growing worse. Gun violence has been growing worse. Businesses have been shutting down. I mean, look, it functions, I guess. And that's what really matters. I think it will take more time for this to truly degrade and get worse and worse and worse, and it will. Crime is getting worse, but people adapt and tolerate it. So all that really happens is this. People like me who eventually say, I just don't want to live in a place like this, we move out. We bring our success and our industry elsewhere. This is gentrification. Now, of course, the left would call it white flight. The funny thing is, I'm not white. I guess they will call me that, though, because it's the only way to fit their ideology. No, it's more like brain drain. You got individuals like me who want to start businesses and have a track record of success, and I'm not going to run a business in Chicago. It's just not going to happen. Now, I'll be completely honest. When we were planning on leaving New Jersey, we did entertain Chicago as a possibility because the crime has led to a drop in the cost of certain properties, and there was an opportunity to get a big building for cheap in a major urban center. And so there was a possibility there. Plus, I think we could do some good in Chicago. But ultimately, I think it was never a strong contender. The cost of the buildings still are too high. And considering the crime rate, I was like, look, even if we do find a building in the Chicagoland area, in these suburbs, the corruption and the crime are just out of control. So there's no real point in doing it. The best place to be is probably in MAGA country in West Virginia. Not to mention, if you want to keep in bare arms, Chicago ain't it. Andy No tweets, leftist Brandon for Chicago has won the Chicago mayoral election. Johnson calls for removing law enforcement from society during the 2020 riots. He defended looters, saying they were lashing out against racism. Chicago's violent crime has, he continues. Oh, it's they don't have the tweet here. Let me pull up the secondary tweet here from Andy No. He says, Chicago's violent crime has surged over the last few years under Lori Lightfoot. I mentioned this story about hanging out at the casino because this is where I basically talk to regular people when we're outside of the news. We're not talking politics. This guy was telling me a story about his buddy who was in Baltimore with his girl in a pickup truck. He said that he gets surrounded by a bunch of far left extremists who are banging on the car and screaming. So he hits the gas. The truck hits someone on a bike who falls over. He gets chased down by people who then start, threatening him, and he flees. He calls the police, tells them what happened. They track him down. They arrest him. If you read the news about this guy, you won't hear any of that. Now, here's where it gets kind of sad. I asked this guy, do you think your buddy would be interested in doing an interview about this? And he said, yeah, probably. And I was like, I'll give you my information. I'd love to talk to this guy and figure out what happened because he's been convicted of attempted murder now. Well, you know what? I'll tell you what happened. This guy then told me he thought the J6ers should be executed. And I said, I'm not going to give this guy my information. True story. He said he thought the January 6 people should all be executed and that it's treason, etc. And I'm like, the vitriol in his voice. I said, this guy, I feel bad for his buddy, but I'm not going to pursue that one. Here I thought there was a normal guy who was just like, I can't believe what's happened in this country. I can't believe what they did to my friend. And I was like, I bet the media lied about him. I was like, oh yeah, they called him a white supremacist. And he was like, he was just in a car with his girl and they were banging on his car and he freaked out and he tried to get away. There's no video of it. There's no stories of it. I tried looking it up. I found very little. I thought it was interesting. We've seen these stories of people who have been attacked by BLM and Antifa flee in their car. We see those stories because someone happened to have filmed it. But it appears here's a story where nobody did. This guy's now going to prison for a long time because the far left attacked him. You know what? There's nothing I can do for this guy. He wanted the J6ers executed, and I thought to myself, I don't see a path forward. Because there's certainly no way a guy calling for the death of people like that is going to want to have any kind of, I can't help him. I can't. I'll feel bad for his buddy. Maybe we'll try and reach out and figure out what this story is, because to hear a story like that and see nothing in the media, I'm like, if what you're saying is true, that he was attacked by the far left in the summer of love, and we get that story out with proof, we could maybe help this guy. He was extradited from PA back to Maryland, where he's now been convicted of attempted murder. And I'll pursue that story, but not through that guy who wants to execute January 6 rioters. That's crazy to me. Maybe we'll figure out more about this, but you know what? This is where it's all going. And it's going there because of people like that dude I talked to. Look, we were playing poker, had a fun time. The guy was funny. We played some good hands. He beat me once. There was a funny bit where, for those that understand, he was complaining about a certain hand. It's like, every time I get this hand, I lose. As he's saying it, I'm looking down, seeing the exact same hand. And then I bet against him and he beats me with 2 pair. And I said, you deserve to win. And I flipped over my cards and he busts out laughing. And it's sad. We had a good time. A lot of jokes were had. But when it came to politics, it was so extreme. It was terrifying. I'm not going to tell you the exact words he used about executing the J6ers. It was worse than just saying execute, but I'm keeping it tame. And that's where I'm like, man, this politics stuff is ripping us apart and it's going to get bad. It's happening in Chicago and it'll only get worse. I'll leave it there. If you want to take a look at that story and start digging into it to find out what happened to this guy, because I don't know if the story's true. His name is Brian Adams. The story took place in Baltimore. He was in, my understanding, it was a pickup truck. The most I could find about the story based on what this guy told me is that it's probably the guy, Brian Adams, in his red pickup truck. Maybe I'm wrong. Or maybe his story was wrong. Or maybe this guy, Brian, was guilty of something. No idea. You look it up. See what you find. Next segment is, I don't know if I have another segment. Check out the Culture War podcast at youtube.com/Timcast, 1 p.m. And support the show. Become a member at timcast.com. And I'll see y'all next time.